But there's a little sort of Irish rebel inside my head that would like to suggest that actually everybody in this room knows a lot more about content creation than you think you do, or we give ourselves credit for. Hands up if you've got a Facebook account. Twitter account? So I think, in fact, maybe the other way around. Hands up if you haven't got. Great. Everybody in the room is a content creator, so it's perfect. And what I mean by that is that everybody in the room knows the rules of great content, is that you use the right platform for the audience you want to talk to. So you probably say different things on LinkedIn than you do on Twitter, than you do on Facebook. I definitely tell you that nobody in this room would ever be on my Facebook account because it's family only and it's a different type of conversation from Twitter. And we all know different platforms, different rules, different style of engagement. So we all know that whatever we ping out into the ether needs to matter in some way to the person who's going to receive it at the far end. We need to know that we're going to engage them, inform them, excite them, and our goal is to hopefully get them to ping something back to us, and we start to get a two-way conversation, and our first piece of content, if it's a video or a photograph or a chat, develops into a second piece and a third piece. So one of the rules of great content creation is that it's not a one-off piece of activity. You're engaged for the next 6 months, the next year, the next 18 months, the next 2 years. It's very, very different from an old-fashioned sort of advertising campaign. So we all get the rules already quite innately, and I think we need to hang on to that, to think of content as being created for human beings, and to think of the rules of conversation when we're thinking through creating campaigns, because at the end of the day, your content sparks off more content, and in an ideal world, your content gets pinged onto people you don't even know, and that's what our clients are looking for, shareability and excitement at the far end of the content. And that's what great content and all campaigns are, useful and exciting to the recipient at the far end. So actually everybody in the room is an expert already. Brilliant. And actually, because it's even that easy, it's not even much of a new concept in communications. Now, this is the first content platform the IPA have ever had, but in 1895, the first ever generally accepted piece of content communication was the John Deere magazine that they created so that they could talk to farmers about all things agricultural and tractors. So we've just been a bit slow catching up on the content revolution, really. So it's been out there already, and the really good thing, I think, about the John Deere piece of activity is that they were just tapping into existing behaviours. They were tapping into farmers reading, newspaper and magazine reading activities for information on the world and information on what's new. So they weren't trying to create a brand new behaviour, and that's another really interesting to think about our content campaigns. It's much, much more difficult to get somebody to do something that they weren't doing already. Invite them into your world and give them stuff that they love already and build on that. So really in my world, it's all quite simple. Consumers love to experience, talk about and share great content. So that's got to be the golden rule at the centre of it. But it has to be useful. As I say, John Deere was already tapping into their behaviours. And so what we need to do every day of the week is realise and understand what role our brand plays in their lives. It's the same old rule of all communications. We've got to understand the role the brand can play in their lives, and our content has to deliver against that. And I think the Mercedes team were really, really clear about the role of the brand, particularly to the new audiences they wanted to engage. Coming a little bit forward from 1895, Lord Reith, one of the founding fathers, not too far forward though, one of the founding fathers of the BBC in 1922, he enshrined 3 principles of all content that the BBC should develop all content around. And these 3 Reithian principles are still in existence at the BBC today. They're inform, educate, and entertain. And if you have a look at any content that you see in the world, any really great stuff, it does fit back to 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 of those rules. And if you can get all 3, that's really exciting. And the BBC Reithian principles are still in place today and used widely across the BBC to help us sort of distinguish from EastEnders, from our EastEnders from our shipping forecast. Although thinking about that today, I was thinking you could argue which one's more entertaining. So of course the key skill that content creators at the BBC have always layered on top of the 3 principles is the principle of storytelling. And again, I think that Mercedes brings that to life, and some of the guys that we'll talk about later on today. It's not really very exciting campaign or very exciting content if you don't bring great stories into consumers' lives. But the thing about content is that it's not like the mini stories we're used to telling in the world of advertising. These stories might go on for months or even years. And some of the things that we need to talk about is serialization, dramatic moments, cliffhangers. And so bringing the whole storytelling skills into content is really exciting as well. And some of the case studies tonight really go through that. I did think I was really clever getting that Reithian principle until I read the content in IPA Effectiveness 22 that talks about content. And Sarah Warby from Sainsbury's, talking about her case study, said, content is stuff that people choose to spend time with. So it's got to be entertaining, useful, or teach them something, preferably all three. So she's there anyway, either that or she just sort of bastardized Ruth. So we all do it. We all create great content, and actually that's why we're probably all in this business. It's been around forever as a philosophy, so we're not trying to create new rules. We should actually look back and learn from some of the great content, whether it was made and paid for or occurred naturally. But all is not perfect in the world of content creation. One of the key things I think we should be aware of is the phrase long format content. I think sometimes it's talked about in creatives. I've seen it in creative briefs. And I think it sort of limits people to thinking about content as just a long ad or a 30-minute ad or a 60-minute ad. Actually, the story is what you're starting with the piece of content. And so one, I think, the really important thing about content is think of the story that you want to tell over the coming months, the coming weeks, and the coming years. And I think the brands that are really clued up on their content strategy know the story ahead. And so when consumers interact with them or something happens in the news, they know how that shapes their story and they know how to play the rest of the content. So I think that's one of the things to be aware of. Obviously, great content campaigns are integrated into the whole campaign, into the paid-for advertising, into the PR, into the production, and into the brand, as Mercedes talked about. So it's not separate. So a team that knows the story they want to tell, knows the key elements of the overall campaign, can work in really, really exciting ways with their content. Who owns the content, I think, is something that we're also going to discuss tonight. Where does it live? Media agencies, creative agencies, digital agencies, production companies. And that's one of the really tough areas that we're discussing as an industry. But no matter where it lies, it needs to be rooted in a strong brand idea. It needs to encapsulate the brand's values, the brand's guiding purpose, and the brand proposition. Content that's just a fraction of an idea or hung slightly on the edge of the idea is not nearly as strong as content that's rooted in the brand. The final thing I think we need to think about is the key behavioural change for agencies in working with content is speed and flexibility. Once you put your content out there into the marketplace, no matter how much you invest in the original films like Mercedes, you've got to respond to how consumers respond to you. You've got to be prepared with your next piece of content or prepared with your story. So you've got to be agile and you've got to be flexible and you've got to be ready to be tactical once your story goes out there. You have to know the story you want to tell. I think that's the key thing. Then at the end of the day, some of the old-fashioned KPIs still matter. We need to still think about reach in the world of content. We need to think about consumer participation, shareability, interactivity, key elements that we need to talk about. So we do need to have hard measures at the end of the day in our content campaigns. So we can bring it back to Romy at the end of the day, which is where you get your IPA awards. So between them, the panel are going to cover all of these areas. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew Canter to kick us off